Will
Okay.
Kaufman is an emeritus professor of American cultural history at the University of Central Lancashire in England. He's the author of two books on Woody Guthrie. He's the author of three books on Woody Guthrie. Woody Guthrie, American Radical, Woody Guthrie's Modern World Blues, and what was the third one?
Mapping Woody Guthrie.
Mapping Woody Guthrie. Tell me about Mapping Woody Guthrie. That's not one that's on my list, and now I have to go and order a copy because that's who I am.
Well, yeah, it's good because it's a short one. I'm trying to find a copy here, but I think they're all downstairs. It's a short one. It's the shortest of my Woody books. What that does is yeah, I can't find the copy up here. Sorry. It's also Oklahoma Press. It's the last book I wrote on Woody, and that one is an introduction to Woody with how geography and place, his interaction with locations, with time and place, and at specific times, how that impacted on his output. So it's a very geographical based look at Woody.
Hmm.
Um, you know, places that he went from. Because geography is so important to him. From New York to the from California to the New York Island and all places in between. He does get very regional, and he also did a lot of travel. I mean, during the war, he was at sea. He went to Europe. He went to North Africa. So it's looking at all of these, the impact of place on Woody and how that may have. Well, it wouldn't be determined. I don't want to be deterministic about it, but how important place was when you're considering Woody's output, place, location. You know.
Someone like Woody, at least in the popular imagination of him, seems to coalesce a kind of American version of the wandering minstrel or the wandering bard. And
Yeah.
then it would seem that a an analysis of him in the respect of his travels would probably yield fascinating information. Is that what you found?
Yeah, it really did. I really did. I mean, it seemed to me that that's a very important part, not only of his actual biography, but of course, it's an important part of the mythology, which he worked very hard to maintain himself. He wanted that to broadcast that sense of his being constantly on the road and everything, and it created some mythologies, quite a lot of mythology about, particularly about, hopping the freight trains. He couldn't stand hopping freight trains. He didn't hop that many freight trains. He liked riding in comfort, whether he's
Hmm.
driving or whether he's on a bus or whether he's in an airplane, things like that. So I think part of his mythology does have to do with his ability to gobble up space, geography. But actually, particular locations are really important to him. New York was incredibly important to him. California was important to him. The Pacific Northwest, uh, the Texas Panhandle, the sea, the ocean.
Hmm.
All of these places were really important to him, and they did and he was very sensitive to uh, location, to place, and trying to bring it into his writing, so that you have a sense through his songs often and through his prose. You do have a sense of location. You have a sense of the visual of what it looks like on the plains, or what it looks like on the sea, or what it looks like in the Pacific Northwest along the Columbia River Gorge, something like that. Uh, so all these things are really crucial if you want to get the most out of Woody, you know.
It sounds as though, in respect of his travels, that Woody had a gift for synopsizing experience, uh,
Uh,
and
yeah, I'd say so. I'd say that yeah, very much. He's able to condense entire journeys into a song, or into a chapter, or even a couple of paragraphs, say in Bound for Glory, or his other writings. He can synopsize place and entire regions.
Hmm.
very, very, adeptly, I think.
Now, your scholarship and your writing on Woody has it started out with the book American Radical, where you were looking at him specifically from the lens of left-wing politics. And then you expanded that to include Woody's encounter with modernism, if you will, and now with geography. Can you talk a little bit about your own personal explorations? What drew you into studying Woody, and what made you take that particular arc of moving from his politics to these other aspects of his being?
Sure. Okay. Well, I grew up in Montclair, New Jersey. And, my parents were, I guess, call it left-handed politically. And my dad was sort of on the social periphery of Pete Seeger and the Weavers, because Ronnie Gilbert of the Weavers had been married to my dad's college roommate.
Uh-huh.
So that's how, my parents, my brother remembers Pete Seeger carrying him around the apartment in New York once. Those records, the folk revival records of Seeger and the Weavers and Joan Baez and Judy Collins and Woody, of course, they were all always around our house, even though my dad was mostly a jazz aficionado and my mom was classical, but there was that side of it as well. So I grew up listening to the music and then playing it. I mean, I'm a guitarist and a banjo player. My oldest brother is a folk singer, guitarist. My middle brother is a bluegrass guitarist, quite a famous one, Steve Kaufman. And so that kind of string music and bluegrass music and folk music was always a part of our soundscape, as
Hmm.
much as classical and jazz was as well. So I really didn't start thinking seriously about Woody as somebody I wanted to explore until after I'd moved over here to the UK. I came over here first as an undergraduate on a junior year abroad program, and then I came back I got a Marshall scholarship to study at the University of Wales, and that's where I got my degree in American literature. Kind of weird way of going about it. But being an American abroad during the reign of George W. Bush in the 1990s, in particular, was a tough time to be an American abroad. It was a very belligerent time, and a lot of belligerent voices coming out of as I say, people like Rumsfeld and Condoleezza Rice and Bush himself and Cheney, those kind of people had commandeered the global bullhorn,
Hmm.
and they were speaking for America. It was all, if you're not with us, you're against us, and all that kind of crap. And I was frantically looking for another American voice that I could broadcast in whatever way was possible, either through my teaching but also through performance. And I put together these performance pieces on Woody,
Hmm.
and I would basically tell his story almost like a live documentary. And except rather than play a CD, I'd sing the songs myself, with guitar, banjo, fiddle, whatever. And I took these things around the country, and then when I sort of branched off, I decided I wanted to get deeper into it besides just performing. Um, so I began researching, and I think it's probably inevitable that I was thinking politically more than anything else, so the politics would come first. That's how American Radical, came out. I was able to get a scholarship, a fellowship at Woody Guthrie, BMI, from the broadcast music industry. Um, they have a fellowship, a Woody Guthrie Research Fellowship, and I got two of those, which
Hmm.
took me to the Woody Guthrie archives. First, they were in New York when I was there, and then they transferred to Tulsa. So I've been to both, and I've had my hands, and to get your hands on Woody Guthrie's notebooks and letters and everything. It's, if you want to talk about a historical frisson walking up your back, I had, weeks and weeks of that on multiple occasions. Um, so after I finished the first book, I realized there was so much more to Woody Guthrie besides just the left-handed politics or the mythology. And I really, really latched onto how modern he was.
Hmm.
How, he was really abstract painter. He was an abstract sculptor. He was an abstract writer. And he thought really, really hard about modernity and its impact on human lives. And he was fascinated with things like highways. He was fascinated with things with cars, fast cars. He was just a real geek. Fascinating with recording
Hmm.
technology, with television, with cinema, with science. He wrote songs about flying saucers. He wrote songs about rocket ships. He wrote songs about airplanes. So he wrote songs about plastic. The invention of plastic and things.
Hmm.
So there was so much more to him than that dusty, boxcar, side door Pullman, uh, thumb hopping hobo. There was just so much more to him. So that ended up being the genesis of Woody Guthrie's Modern World Blues.
Hmm.
You know, and I just learned so much about. It really busted open that frame of the Dust Bowl balladeer. I think considerably.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Do you feel that Woody's proclivity for self reinvention is in what way is that part of his story? Is it an American characteristic to reinvent oneself?
I think Americans would like to think that it is because that's also part of the national mythology, isn't it? Whether it's Benjamin Franklin, here's how you do it, his do-it-yourself manual, the autobiography, or whether it's James Gatsby becoming Jay Gatsby. I mean, that is part of and then of course in Black American history, there's the migration from the South to the North would constitute some kind of a reinvention of identity. Um, I don't think it's exclusive to America. I'm really, really suspicious of national mythologies and ideologies the longer that I have been living elsewhere in the world.
Hmm.
You know, um, and I think the idea of American exceptionalism needs to be looked at with, I think, a lot of caution, because I think there are many societies you could find where freedom is very important and is part of the
Hmm.
the uh, the narrative, the cultural and the political narrative.
I was thinking, however, about if we look at bardic archetypes elsewhere in the world, African griots or Croatian guslars, or some of the Rajasthani, the Manganiyars, the people who travel from town to town singing stories and so on, all of their repertoire is conditioned on this very deep sense of embedded history that the griots will know everybody's family lineage. And if you meet a griot and they learn your name, they'll proceed to recite your ancestry for a week. But
Yeah.
but someone like Woody, although he might have exemplified a bardic archetype, America didn't have as much of a sense of embedded history in the landscape that people were aware of. Lineages weren't part of the repertoire, or at least that's what I'm gleaning from it. I'm curious what your thought is on that.
I think rather than lineage, I think, again, this is where geography comes into it. I mean, the canvas was the American continent for
Hmm.
him. So, and because he was also writing about a famous line that he scrolled at the bottom of the manuscript to what became "This Land Is Your Land" is, all you can write is what you see. That's a note a reminder that he told himself that ended up at the bottom of the manuscript of "This Land Is Your Land." And now when you go to the Woody Guthrie archives in Tulsa, when you enter the archives, it's like in the stentorian, almost Roman Latin letters above the door to the archives. All you can write is what you see. And so I think rather than going back through history, I mean, he did write about historical figures. He wrote ballads about, he wrote ballads about Harriet Tubman. He wrote ballads about Lincoln. He wrote, he looked back to events before he was born, like the 1913 massacre, or other events before he was born. So he certainly had a sense of history. He was an avid reader of history. But I think for him, like very much for the other kind of major bardic figure that you would think of, the two major bardic figures I imagine that you would think of would be Walt Whitman and perhaps Jack Kerouac.
Hmm.
And what was more important to them was place, was the landscape, was the here and the now of what they're looking at, what they're seeing. They're writing what they see, and so that I think is where they grabbed what they had in front of them. Much more than going back and looking back in history. I mean, you can look at some Whitman poems, Passage to India or something like that, and you would see that he's reaching all the way back to, prehistory of India or something. But really, it's about that circling of the globe and the completing the circle through, say, the construction of the Suez Canal and the laying of the Atlantic cable. If you read Passage to India, history is in there, but it is more again about what's happening right in front of his eyes now, that year that he's writing it. And I think that's the same with Woody.
And when you say, when Woody writes, you can only write what you see, I think, would you agree that part of what distinguishes Woody from other people who were writing material or creating material that commented on current events was that Woody saw a great deal more?
I think so. He did see a great deal more. I mean, he did travel. I mean, when I say that he built a mythology around himself as the hobo, America's hobo, that doesn't mean, the fact that it's mythology doesn't mean that he didn't travel. He certainly traveled. He was incredibly well traveled. But in addition to what he saw, there's what he read. He based a lot of his songs on newspaper um, uh, articles. I mean, you would walk into his home in Mermaid Avenue in Brooklyn, and Marjorie, his wife, talked about this, that, everywhere pinned to lampshades and windows and mirrors and everything is newspaper articles of the day that he is going to use to write about. So he was very current in that respect. So it was not only what he actually saw on the ground, and he did. He often used to say stuff. Well, these words, all that I'm writing, you wrote them, all you people. I'm your voice. I'm the bardic voice of you, the people, and I'm writing everything that I hear you say and everything. And yeah, he did that too. But he also relied very much on turning what he read into song, and whether it's from books or from newspapers. Very literate. He was incredibly literate. He tried to give this impression that he was unlettered,
Hmm.
and that couldn't be further from the truth. His library was immense. His record collection was immense, and he was a voracious reader. I mean, he would gobble up entire libraries, from a very early age. Autodidact. So that kind of haphazard education, certainly. He dropped out of high school. Never finished high school, but neither did Mark Twain.
Hmm.
Neither did Lincoln. That didn't stop them from gaining one hell of an education, and so he did too, through much of it through reading.
There's a big component of the American mythology of people who drop out of school and educate themselves on their own and
Yeah.
reinvent themselves along those lines. And it's not it's not antithetical to being heavily literate. Your description of Woody, it sounds a little bit like my browser windows right now.
Yeah,
It sounds like he had about 45 tabs all open with stuff currently percolating. And where's the music coming from?
yeah, he did. I mean, he was golly, whether I mean, now we talk about now you try to find these kind of syndromes, whether it's ADHD or autism, or in Woody's case, at one point in his biography, Joe Klein um, asked the question, where did his Huntington's disease end and his creativity start? To what extent did having that Huntington's gene working on the synapses in his brain and shutting them down, and so forcing new kinds of connections to be made in his brain? To what extent the Huntington's had something to do with his incredibly I mean, he was like a moth. You know how you look at moths flying around and you
Uh-huh.
can't. That he's very much like that. I think in terms of his creativity, just everywhere. You know, um, what's the cause of it? I don't know, but I think that metaphor you have of all the tabs open at once. I think that's what it would have been like if he ever got his hands on a laptop. I'm sure. You know.
Well, it
Yeah.
takes a very particular kind of mind to be able to uh, not just assimilate that much information, but to have the kind of multitasking capability to have it all floating up there all at once, and then to turn it into a song, a declarative sentence, a paragraph that somehow seems to capture everything.
Or a painting. I mean,
Right.
his painting, his artwork, mostly watercolors. You go to the archives and you get your hands on some of these things, and it's. I mean, he was intense. Nora, his daughter, said that he was sort of like a dog who has to go leave his mark on fire hydrant to lamppost to fire hydrant. Just everywhere saying "I was here." And there is that aspect of his output in that he was constantly putting stuff down on paper. Half of the, I would say half of it, I wouldn't say that, but so much of the material in the Woody Guthrie archives, in addition to his hundreds of notebook volumes and letters, uh, scraps written on the backs of envelopes, placemats,
Mhm.
wallpaper torn off the wall, bits of napkins, toilet paper. I mean, he wrote on everything, and he was writing all the time or marking stuff all the time, whether writing or just spewing his art down onto whatever surface is available to receive it. So, in that respect, I mean, he was, on the one hand, he was very scatterbrained in that respect, but on the other hand, he was highly focused because that's what he did all the time.
Mhm.
To the exclusion, I think, of even, particularly in his first marriage, to the exclusion of looking after his family and doing things that really need to be done. I think he was much better at it with his second marriage, his marriage to Marjorie, because she whipped him into shape to some extent, and also was quite controlling in the sense of making sure that he did write, making sure that he did produce, but at the same time, in a slightly more um, embraceable way.
Mhm.
She was like, she was like an iron cage, and you could widen that cage, but it was still a cage, and that's I think what she tried to sort of control this force, or
Mhm.
have some kind of influence on this force and channel it in a way that it would be um, productive in a sense, productive, but not just for himself. He was such a private artist. I mean, he didn't put all this stuff down on paper so it could be seen by other people. Much of what the vast majority of his output, even whether it's song lyrics or whether it's prose or whether it's visual art, drawing, painting, sculpture, he didn't intend for it to go anywhere. It just stayed with him. You know that
There's a wonderful quote from John Maynard Keynes who says, "How do I know what I think until I hear myself say it?" And it sounds as though Woody didn't necessarily know what he thought until he wrote it or until he painted
I,
it.
yeah, I think that's really seriously possible that that is the case. You know, um, the act of writing and the act of painting is an act of discovery, and and I think that's the case. You know, with Woody, he was discovering what he knew by writing it. You know, I think
In a
that's
way, the constant documentation, it's not an association that occurs immediately, but it reminds me a little bit of Buckminster Fuller, who notoriously documented everything. And
hmm, yeah,
if he drew a triangle on a napkin, he would date it and sign it and hand it over to one of his assistants for inclusion in the Dymaxion archives, which are now in whatever the Fuller Institute is.
yeah.
And
Well, Woody didn't necessarily have the assistant, but that's exactly what he did. He signed everything. He signed and dated just about everything, you know, as though there's a part of him that is hoping it will be discovered,
mhm.
or that he could come back to it later and know when he and remember when he did it. But yeah, it's there's not too much. My recollection, there's not too much in the archives that isn't signed and dated,
Hmm.
even at the almost the bottom of every notebook page. You know, yeah.
Trace a little bit of the story of uh, how Woody became part of our national imagination. Um, when he showed up in New York, right? In the that was in the late 30s, early
In
40s.
1940, yeah, and he moved to New York in 1940. I think he was already beginning to get noticed when he was out in California. He traveled to California about 1937, 36, 37. And it was to flee the Dust Bowl, but it was also, he didn't go out to California because he wanted to become a spokesman of the Dust Bowl migrants and the Dust Bowl refugees, as he called them, or as they were called. Um, he went out there because he wanted to be a singing cowboy.
Hmm.
His cousin, Oklahoma Jack Guthrie, was already out there and said, "Why don't you come on out and we could, Roy Rogers is doing it, Gene Autry is doing it, let's us do it. The Beverly Hillbillies are doing it, let's us do it. So that was the plan. Um, and then and he got a program on the KFVD radio station in Los Angeles, and it was just, he found out really that his most loyal and broadest audience were the Dust Bowl refugees who had come out to California, that whole Grapes of Wrath sort of story. And at one point, his station manager, the manager of the KFVD station, said, "Look, I want you to do some reporting on the conditions in the migrant camps, and because you're from Oklahoma,
Hmm.
you can get in there where a lot and get some, get close to people in a way that other people cannot. So what was the question?
He
Where
was
were we?
he had been requested to go and do some reporting on the migrant camp.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So when he went into these migrant camps and began to hear the stories of the lives of the people who came there, came looking for work, and they would begin also to write into his station because they
Hmm.
realized, he realized that they were listening to his program. And so I think this is part of the beginning of his politicization. I mean, he did dally even before he left Texas, because he migrated from Oklahoma down to the Texas Panhandle with his father when he was 17.
Hmm.
And it was from Texas. It was in Texas that he encountered the Dust Bowl. Even though he's known as the Okie Bard. In fact, it was Texas, the Texas Panhandle, where he really came of age and experienced that devastation of the Dust Bowl. Um, so when he was out there in California, I think when he saw the way that the Dust Bowl migrants were being treated, I think that really is the first real um, political, I suppose, force that he meets with, because he did dally in socialism. He read a little bit of Marx. He read a little bit of stuff when he was still back in Texas.
Hmm.
But it's when it gets translated from theory to life, that's really where he saw that because of the Dust Bowl. Not only the migration from Texas to California, but also encountering the other migrants there.
And he
So he
also
did
encountered
witness a lot. I
other.
think
He also encountered uh, in California. He was introduced to a community of radical thinkers and left wingers.
that's right. That's the other. I was going to say, besides his own experience, there are people like Ed Robin. There are people like Will Geer, who went on to play Grandpa
Right.
Walton in the Walton. There are people like Al Richmond, the editor of the People's World, that he wrote for, and there are much other people in the Hollywood political community that he was rubbing shoulders with. John Steinbeck. Will Geer introduced him to John Steinbeck. So it's the people and the milieu that he gets involved in and also a great racial awareness. This is where
Mm.
and there are a number of there are a number of almost milestones that you could date precisely as to how that's working on his racial awareness. Nora Guthrie says, I don't think my dad ever heard the words "that's racism" until he heard them from Will Geer. So that's one thing. There's also a moment that happened to him because he was on the radio one day, and he announced a song that he was going to play that had the N word in it in
Hmm.
the title, and he announced it with the title, and blithely carried on and played it, and then he got a letter, an angry letter or a stern letter the next day. And actually, I must say that I am among the scholars who perpetuated the misinformation that it was a young black man who wrote the letter. In fact, it was a young woman. So we have found.
Mm.
A scholar has recently did some detective work and found that it was a woman named Olivia May Daniels. So, and she wrote this letter to Woody, basically saying, you were getting along pretty well in your program last evening until you announced the N word blues. And she says, I'm a Negro, a young Negro in college, and I certainly resented your remark. Nobody of any intelligence uses that word over the radio today. Right. And it was like a slap in the face. I mean, he was stunned and he was mortified. He read, to his credit, he read the letter in its entirety aloud over the airwaves the next day, and he said, you hear that song or you hear that sound, and he was ripping up the song sheet out of his notebook of that song, saying, I'm never going to play that song again, and I won't use that word again, and I apologize to the Negro people for those frothings that I let slip out the corners of my mouth. So
That's
I did
pretty
it.
solid. That's
It
not.
is pretty.
That's not a no apology.
No, no, that was a real apology. It's not like, I'm sorry you were offended. It wasn't
Right.
anything like that. I'm sorry for what I did. And in fact, I did a TED talk on this in Tulsa, and you could see it. It's a TEDx talk. It's
Hmm.
called Woody Guthrie and the Art of Making Good. Because one of the things that also has attracted me to Guthrie was the fact that, all right, he had feet of clay, no doubt about it. He screwed up in so many areas and so many, time and time again. But he just struck me as someone who was always willing and able to make amends, to make reparation is the word that I think he is the word that I would use. He tries throughout his life to repair any damage that he has done, and he knows he's done a lot of damage. He Whether it's to women, whether it's to friends, whether it's to entire groups of people, he knows. But I do believe he always tried to make amends and to repair the damage that he did. And that's one thing that I admire about him. And that the more that I learned about him, that came to the fore with me. That, gosh, if everybody could do that with the honesty that he did it with, you know, one of the points that I make in that TED talk is that you have entire nations who have committed crimes and their leaders refuse to apologize. They don't want to apologize because they were afraid of what are going to be the consequences of admitting what they have done. So they're mealy mouthed, sort of, I'm sorry we have hurt you, or something like that, but never accepting responsibility, and when you think of the whole debate about reparations over slavery, people are afraid. White people are afraid, think, oh, well, that means I'm going to have to empty my pockets. Well, there are a million ways of making
Right.
reparation besides putting a price tag on it. You could have scholarships, you could have museums, you could have you could have acknowledgments of various things. You know what I mean? And that's one of the things about, we see what's happening in the United States now. I think one of the reasons why the MAGA movement is so anti-DEI, it's because they know damn well that there is a reason why this kind of affirmative action has had to come into existence, because of the crimes that were committed at Black people's expense and women's expense and the expense of non-binary people, or whatever you want to call it,
Well, as
And
the saying goes, you never hate anybody more than the ones you've wronged.
of course, yeah, and it's delusional, and it's a kind of massive denial that psychologists would have a field day with. I mean, I've studied Melanie Klein and her, and her theories about the need for us to make reparation throughout our lives, because if we do not, then we are in a permanent paranoid, schizoid position of where we can't even see the world, and we can't even see ourselves in it, because we're so busy pushing the world away and building this wall around us, rather than, moving forward by acknowledging and then making reparation. And that's something that Woody, I think, really strove so hard to do throughout his life, to make reparation and to, acknowledge the wrongs that he had done and to move forward with them, and
Mm-hmm.
ask the world to do the same. I think that's why he's so attractive to me anyway. Probably more than anything else, that's why he's so attractive to me.
Which is not always the case in our public figures. And there's an awful lot of folks who are not able to recognize their own errors or move
No,
forward in that. And their reinvention consists of a kind of revalorization of everything that they've done.
yeah, I know. Yeah, look what I've, here are my credentials, whatever. But, and I'll have to say that, I mean, as a Woody Guthrie scholar, that's worked on me personally as well, because I remember once I I wrote I wrote an article on This Land Is Your Land for The Conversation, because it had come under attack, I think, mostly from Native American commentators, musicians. One who Mali Obobsawin wrote in the Smithsonian magazine about how what she had against that song, and how it was, even though it was a leftist protest song, that still there was a huge blind spot in it, which is, this land is made for you and me. Well, what do you mean? Was it really? This was our land. Now it's your, that kind of thing, right? So I wrote an article because in defense of Woody, because at that time I was, such a Woody champion, and then I got some feedback from a number of people, including some Native Americans, who were saying, well, it's really bad form for somebody who's not an indigenous American to sort of advocate against our position. We do have a problem with this song, and there's a reason why we have a problem with this song. And it's like, a white person, doesn't go up to a black person and say that's not racism.
Hmm.
You know, black people know what racism is. You don't go up to a Jew and say that's not anti-Semitism. Jews know what anti-Semitism is. Now, I know a lot of my friends, people in my family, who have used the charge of anti-Semitism to avoid engaging with certain political things as well. Having to do with Israel and Israel, right or wrong kind of thing. And that's in my own family. I mean, I know that happens, but I did feel that I got a slap on the wrist, and I deserved it.
Hmm.
In that respect, and I've tried to make amends, make reparation for it, both in my last book, which I conclude with a discussion of This Land Is Your Land, and that book is American Song and Struggle from Columbus to World War II, and
Hmm.
I conclude with that, and even the second book that I've just finished, World War II to the present. Again, I end up come back to Woody again and again, and I conclude briefly with a reference to This Land Is Your Land again as something that let's accept that it's a highly problematic song, and that not everyone will see it as the great inclusive anthem that Woody intended it to be. You can't erase history. And so I did have to take on board that my advocacy of Woody, right or wrong, was not the honest way to go. You know.
Do you think Woody, in a hypothetical non in a hypothetical scenario where he was alive and working into the 60s, would have been able to address some of those concerns as Native American issues came more to the front?
I think he would have, and he even did during his lifetime, because he wrote the song Oklahoma Hills. And there is a verse in Oklahoma Hills where it pays homage to the original 5 tribes that were living there in Oklahoma. And his cousin, Oklahoma Jack Guthrie, stole the song and recorded it without giving Woody credit. And there's a letter that Woody that I saw where he's saying, I'm not so angry that he took the song, although he shouldn't have, but he left that verse out.
Mm.
And he was furious about that, So he wanted the acknowledgement there of whose land it was in Oklahoma Hills, right? There isn't any of that explicit acknowledgement in This Land Is Your Land. And now I think, if there was a moment that's a kind of famous one in the life of Pete Seeger, where he and someone else, I think Fred Kirkpatrick, are at the Resurrection City in Washington, D.C., I think about 1968 or 69, and they're singing This Land Is Your Land. And then there's Henry Crow Dog, a Lakota activist and singer. And so they're singing This Land Is Your Land. And he Crow Dog comes up to them, pokes him in either Seeger or Kirkpatrick in the chest and said, "You're wrong. This land was made for me. It's our land." And then Pete and and Fred are going, "Wow, that's right. Well, I don't know. Should we sing this song? Should we sing this song?" And then Crow Dog says, "Basically, I'm only fucking with you. As long as we are here to get something done, But that did make Pete think, and for a long time he couldn't sing the song. And then he began to sing verses. There are a number of verses written by Cappy Israel about, I can't remember what the lyrics are, but basically reflected that this land was stole by you from me. That very much an indigenous perspective on This Land Is Your Land. And which I just think just makes the song more interesting, that it does contain those contradictions and the possibility for clapback to it.
One of the things that's there in our American folk traditions, and I guess all of the the ancestors of that tradition is the idea that uh, a particular song exists in multiple variants simultaneously, and it's not even really entirely correct to speak of a single song, but rather of a sort of cluster of songs. And I guess some of Woody's material has gotten into that status where there are so many competing variants around that you can think of them as a constellation of lyrics and melodies. Reflect on that a little bit.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, you could look at it almost in the technical sense of, where did he get his tunes from and things like that. Well, he borrowed. He didn't write any tunes at all. He was in absolute magpie. When it came to stealing. I mean, "This Land Is Your Land." The tunes for that, we don't even know what was in his head when he stole it from when he lifted it from the Carter family.
Little Pal of
But
Mine.
well, there's little darling pal of mine, but there's also "When the World's on Fire."
Mm.
They both have the same tune, and they were both on that early Carter family album that Woody had. So I don't even know which one he was listening to when he decided to lift it for "This Land Is Your Land," or as he initially called it, "God Blessed America." And I think it's true. And there are many versions of Woody's songs as well, So, I mean, "This Land Is Your Land" itself has so many different versions because it was recorded at certain times where entire verses were left out. And some of those verses were the most radical ones, the anti-capitalist verses, the anti-security state verses, so much so that you could have Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan singing the song at their inaugural concerts or parties or whatever, because they didn't know those verses that Pete Seeger and Bruce Springsteen were so intent on reminding the country that were
I
there.
remember that. That's one of the moments of peak emotion in music for me was at Obama's inauguration and listening to that on the radio and
Yeah.
wondering whether they were going to get to those verses. And
Well, Pete.
then when they did, I lost
Yeah.
it completely.
Well, but the story of that is that Springsteen, Obama asked Springsteen to come and perform, or his people asked Springsteen to come and perform, and Springsteen said, "I will if I can bring Pete Seeger down to join me." And Pete said, "I will come if I can sing all of the verses that Woody wrote. Otherwise, I'm not coming." And so that he was clear. That's why this was his one opportunity. He said no audience this big is ever going to hear the song again at one time. So I want to make sure that I put out there what Woody wrote, and so that's how that happened. But it is such an elastic song. I mean, it can do a million things. It can be a radical anthem, a communist anthem. It could be a nativist anthem, and I'm nativist as opposed to Native American. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it could be a Republican anthem. It could be a Democrat, I mean, it's just so, the U.S. Navy wanted to use it for their commercials, and Nora Guthrie and the Guthrie estate said, "No way." you know.
Is that
And
is that part of why they're using more standard copyright protections for his material? Uh,
yes, that is precisely it, because he was legendary in it is a contradiction about him. He was actually very interested in copyright. He really was. He wanted, when he was writing with the Almanac Singers, they had a credo that it would be a collective credit, the Almanac Singers. He said, "No, I want my name on whatever I wrote, and you can have your name on whatever you wrote." So on the one hand, he says, this song is, copyright number 87564538545179882. And anybody who steals this song and sings it without my permission sure is a friend of mine.
right.
So he says that, but at the same time, he really is interested in copyright and getting credit for what he wrote. So there's that contradiction there. Um, as far as maintaining the copyright of a song like "This Land Is Your Land," which Nora Guthrie did get into a political into a legal battle about that when I can't remember if it was the Navy or someone else wanted to use it, or it was just a sort of they thought that like "Happy Birthday" it had become international property, and she said no because I don't want to, the next thing is I don't want to hear that it's being broadcast through the sound system of Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago,
Right.
you know. So that's why I'm coming down and going against what the mythology about what Woody said about copyright. It's owned by everybody and all that, you know. I mean, the folk tradition, gosh, he could. When you think of how many tunes he lifted,
Hmm.
plagiarized without giving credit to it, and then later on they had to, for instance, rambling round your city, rambling round your town. I never see a friend I know as I go rambling round. That's one of his great Columbia River anthems. Well, it came to the point where they had to acknowledge that was "Good Night." The tune was "Good Night, Irene,"
Hmm.
and that he had to, and he gave Leadbelly, credit for that. Although Leadbelly didn't write the tune to "Goodnight Irene" either. He picked it up somewhere down in Texas or someplace. So it gets a bit dodgy when the folk world, especially when you're trying to, you know, stake your claim to something like that. And and during the folk revival, Izzy Young, who ran the folklore
Hmm.
center, such a huge champion of the up and coming folk singers, said, "I can see what's going to happen now with this folk boom or the great folk scare," as it
Right.
was called. It said people are going to start making money hand over fist by claiming to copyright folk songs, traditional folk songs, not claiming the authorship of them, but claiming the arrangements to them. That's when Lomax was Alan Lomax and John Lomax were legendary for what they did to Leadbelly by
Hmm.
attempting to copyright songs they got from him. Martin Carthy was furious with Paul Simon for such a long time because of he tried to put his name to Scarborough Fair,
Hmm.
and Carthy had said, sorry, this is a folk song. It's not. I don't mind that you ripped me off and you ripped off my whole arrangement and right down to the opening guitar lick. That isn't as bad as what you're trying to do, which is to copyright a folk song. You know, so that happened with Woody as well, I think, and it's going on all the time.
It points to the fact that the folk process and our modern notions of intellectual property are not actually compatible, and it's all
Yeah.
there's always going to be a problem with
There
that.
is, and it's not only with words. I mean, with music as well. You've got in our tradition, you got 12 notes to the musical scale. That's all we got. And as BB King said, it's the same for Beethoven as it is for BB. This is all we've
Hmm.
got. So eventually, the law of averages suggested that you're going to start after a while sampling, even if you didn't mean to.
Hmm.
So I'd hate to be a judge deciding the case. I mean, the lawyers, the intellectual property lawyers, they know what angle they're going to take. They know what argument they're going to try and put forward. But I pity the judge who has to decide, or the jury that has to decide, because that's a tough one. Yeah, I
Hmm.
think with 12 notes to the scale to play with, in the West anyway. You know.
12 notes to the scale. I'm reminded of Harry Parch and his 43 tone to the octave
Yes.
setting of
That's right.
his hobo experience was probably more extensive than Woody's.
It uh actually, yeah, it probably is. And I actually write about Parch in the current book I've just finished, American Song and Struggle from World War II to the Present. I spend a good time on Parch and U.S. highball and things like that, and his various instruments and the various the 43 note scale, the true
I,
the true.
I built a harmonic canon when I was in college, and followed all the directions in Parch's book for tuning his scale.
Wow, good luck with that.
That was a hard 6 months, man. I really had to do a lot of work on that. That was
And
something.
I
That
imagine
was a long time ago.
anyone living in the house with you probably had to sort of walk around like,
Those were the days when that kind of stuff could be accomplished.
yeah,
You have to
yeah,
have a
yeah.
certain level of Mishugana anyway to,
You do,
be
yeah,
able to
yeah, yeah.
accomplish that. So I have a couple of other questions, and I want to play you a couple of versions of some Guthrie songs and get your responses.
Okay.
Um, Talk to me about Alan Lomax a little bit. What's your perspective as a Guthrie scholar on Lomax and what he did to create a Guthrie myth, and how that fit with Lomax's whole ideas of uh, cultural transmission and song style and culture and so on?
Ooh, right. Well, I'm not a Lomax expert. I would say that in the first place, Woody owes a lot to Lomax, because Lomax, of course, was such a patron and what's the word I'm looking for?
An advocate?
Advocate and sponsor. I mean, you talk about the Lomax singers. That period in 1940 when, basically Lomax and Will Geer brought together, Seeger, Guthrie, Leadbelly, Josh White, Sonny Terry, Brownie McGee, all of these people who Lomax sponsored and helped along the way, crucially important. And what he did for the whole, cultural equity, crucially important. And the recording he did, crucially important. I wouldn't doubt it. He could get on his high horse a bit about authenticity, so to the extent where like he really pissed off John Cohen of the New Lost City Ramblers, by with the whole thing about city billies and calling these New Yorkers who were trying to doing their best to learn the songs city billies, and
Mhm.
the fights that the fist fight he got into
With Albert
with
Grossman, right?
Albert, about the supposed fakeness of the Mike Bloomfield blues band and all of that. I think he was so tuned to authenticity, but at the same time I think he was so rigid about it as well. you
Hmm.
know um I think that he I think the world was a better place with him than without him. I will say that.
Hmm.
But I think he was a difficult cat,
Clearly, yeah.
in many ways. But there's no doubt how much Woody owed him. There's just no doubt about that. So I'm quite happy to see that Alan Lomax gets the credit that he deserves, not only for bringing us, Woody, but also bringing us Pete and Leadbelly and all the other people that he was responsible really for thrusting into the American consciousness.
Hmm.
So,
It's one of the things that I observe. When I was in college, I did the cantometrics training,
mm,
and when I read about Charles Seeger and the Composers Alliance, the
yeah,
Composers Guild,
collective. Yeah.
the Composers Collective, and they're talking about how we need to create new music that reflects the social forms that we want to create, and of course, it turns out no one wants to sing those
No, it's all in
melodies.
5/4 time, and it's all this strident modernist, Eisler inflected, stuff that you're right. Now, why can't that brought Mike Gold out into
Right.
saying, why can't the American, workers, why don't they sing? Joe Hill was able to get people singing. How come, Seeger and gang can't get, Charles Seeger and whatever, they can't get people singing? Well, because they're writing in really difficult, atonal 5/4 time strident marches and shit. And, nobody wanted to sing that. It wasn't until the Composers Collective and the CPUSA turned finally to folk music as a means of getting people to, then all of a sudden the embracing of folk music. It was a complete 180-degree turnaround from their contempt for folk music as,
Hmm.
the songs of the willing slaves and all of that. Yeah, but the Cantrometrics, I mean, that was a nice try too. I don't think it's going to, I don't think it's going to catch on, because people just want to sing songs,
Right, right.
So, yeah.
Before I play you some recordings, is there anything that you can offer about what would Woody say in response to all of this?
Oh, it depends what all of this is. I mean, I know you had when you first contacted me, you were talking about climate and the environment.
Hmm.
I think that's a really important thing to look at when you're going to look at Woody because, uh, for instance, it was an environmental disaster that made him who he was to some extent. The Dust Bowl, which was a product of serious mismanagement on the part of humanity.
Right.
The greed of exploiting the land for quick cash crops really is what led to that disaster when the weather changed. Um, and and in his writing, you really do get a sense of an environmental awareness in his writing when he describes what the discovery of oil, did to places like Pampa, and we we lost the fish, but we gained the oil. So maybe
Right.
there was that kind of thing, right? But at the same time, his championing of the Grand Coulee Dam and the Bonneville Power dams along the Columbia Gorge, he wasn't aware of the incredible damage that those projects would do, not only to the indigenous people who needed it for fishing, but also for what it would do to the soil, to the water supply, the runoff of farming chemicals,
Hmm.
and so that the Grand Coulee Dam was, and the song "The Grand Coulee Dam" is a monument to the worst kind of ecological mistake
Hmm.
that part of that part of the region had seen. Would he have acknowledged it? I think he would have. He did write songs about the Los Angeles smog.
Hmm.
He did. I think when he once again, that's part of this whole. It was cut. His life was cut short so soon because I think he demonstrated in so many other areas that he is willing to learn and to adapt accordingly. And I have no doubt, it's wrong for a historian to try to predict what way history would have gone. But I think it's pretty reasonable to suggest that he would have been aware of climate change, and I think he would have been doing something about it the way that his protege Pete Seeger was
Hmm.
doing. I think he would have been there side by side with Pete.
Yes.
I think in all of those efforts to not only clean up the Hudson River, but to save the planet.
Right.
I think he would have been there. I really do.
And we already know about his opinion about the Trumps.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
I I have a recording of, I think it's called the Missin' Cousins from California,
Yeah, and they were
touring Old Man
missing.
Trump. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I discovered those verses. That was my work in one of the archive trips, and at the time that I found it, I think it was like 2011 or 2009, about 2009 when I first came across those verses against his Brooklyn landlord, Fred Trump, and the racism that he was imposing at the color line, as
Hmm.
Woody called it. And I remember I transcribed all of them and kept them in my computer. At that time, I was thinking, oh, isn't that interesting? Um, what's his name? That
Right.
apprentice guy. Wow. His father was Woody's landlord. That was just all I was interested in. But then when that loudmouth apprentice guy announced his candidacy for the presidency in 2016, that's when I thought, oh gosh, all right. Well, Woody has, because he was saying Donald Trump was saying, my legacy is my father's legacy.
Right.
And that got me thinking about, well, Woody Guthrie has something to say about your father's legacy. And that's when I published my findings about that. And it got picked up. And then Tom Morello and Ryan Harvey and Sarah Lee Guthrie and Johnny Aaron, they all recorded it, and they called it Old Man Trump. I think it's important to set the record straight. Woody never wrote a song called Old Man Trump.
Got it.
He never did that. That is the title that Ryan Harvey gave to the song that was fashioned from the various fragments from notebooks and letters that I had published in my articles on the conversation. He took those things and put them together into a song called Old Man Trump. And that's with Nora Guthrie's approval.
Mm-hmm.
He did, and all in all, he got it right in the sense of that he was able to. But now, as a historian, I'm constantly, having to field angry letters from MAGA people saying that Woody never wrote a song called. I never said he wrote a song called Old Man Trump, and stuff like that. There was one other thing that Ryan Harvey put into that song, which has caused some historical problems. There was a line that Woody wrote. It says, it's about Beach Haven ain't my home, because that's where Trump was the landlord. And he said, Beach Haven is like heaven where no black folks come to roam, right? And what Ryan wrote is, Beach Haven is Trump's tower where no black ones come to roam.
Mm.
And as he said, I just wanted to throw in a contemporary reference, which, I understand why he'd want to do that. And Nora approved of it as well. Fine. But now I get, emails from people saying, what about Woody's prescience? Boy, that foresight to the point of knowing about Trump Tower. And I said, there was no Trump Tower. Woody never used the phrase Trump Tower. That's Ryan Harvey's phrase, I'm thrilled that the song is out there. I'm thrilled that people know that Woody Guthrie had something to say about the Trump empire and the racism undergirding it. I'm thrilled about that. But the historian me is saying, thanks for the headache. That's it.
So I'm going to switch on to share here for a second, and let me just pull this up. The first thing that I'd like to hear your response to, is a group from the UK called Tantrum Zentrum. Are you familiar with them?
No.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
I can.
Okay. This is their version of whoops, I seem to have the wrong one here. There we go. This is their version, what they call Lady Death, the Russian sniper lady.
Lyudmila, yeah.
Pavlichenko?
Yeah, Pavlichenko.
Okay.
Miss Pavlichenko, yeah.
Miss Pavlichenko, yeah.
Yeah.
Now let's just confirm that you can hear it.
Yep.
Pavlichenko's well known to fame. Ukraina, твоя страна, fighting is your game. The world will love you for a long time to come. For more than 300 Nazis fell by your gun. Miss Pavlichenko's well known to fame. Ukraine is your country, fighting is your game. Your smile shines as bright than your morning sun. For more than 300 Nazi dogs fell by your gun. Fell by your gun, fell by your gun. For more than 300 Nazis fell by your gun. Fell by your gun, fell by your gun. For more than 300 Nazis fell by your gun. In your mountains and canyons, quiet as the deer. Down in your big trees, showing no fear. You lift up your sight and down comes a hand. For more than 300 Nazi dogs fell by your gun. In hot summer heat and cold wintry smell, in all kinds of weather you track down your foe. The world will let them know the way I have done. For more than 300 Nazi dogs fell by your gun. Fell by your gun, fell by your gun. For more than 300 Nazis fell by your gun, fell by your gun, fell by your gun. For more than 300 Nazis fell by your gun.
Okay, so I'm going to unshare for a second, and whoops, let's. All right, there we go.
Mm-hmm.
Your thoughts?
Okay, it's fine. I'm really glad to see that Woody is being able to be picked up and taken by aging punk rockers and everybody. I mean the Dropkick Murphys, of course. First did Shipping Up to Boston, and then now they have a whole album out of Woody's songs. I think I'm always happy to hear Woody's. Extremely happy, ecstatic to hear Woody's stuff being picked up and taken out of the acoustic, singer-songwriter mold and readapted. About the only lines I understood in what you played was, more than 300 Nazis or 300 Nazi dogs fell by your gun. That's good enough for me.
Yeah.
As long as I could hear that, So I'm always happy when Woody gets picked up by I'm the least bit interested in people who try to sound like Woody Guthrie. You know what I mean? I mean it's and Pete Seeger was himself quite explicit about that even before Woody had died, when people were starting to pick up his songs and play them during the second folk revival of the 60s. They say, look, he says, don't try to imitate his accent, don't try to imitate his phrasing, it'll sound fake, phony. Be yourself. And I think Woody himself would have given, in fact did give that advice. I did see some letters that he wrote to young people who were writing to him and he's saying, look, just don't, just be yourself. Don't try to sound like me. Be yourself. People were asking Martin Carthy, how do you feel about, people taking, some of the songs that you made famous, Scarborough Fair, whatever, and, rocking them up with electric. He said, the only thing that's going to hurt these songs is to not play them at all.
Right.
So, and I subscribe to that 100%. And so, I don't know if I'd wanted to be in the room for too long with what you were playing, but God, I'm an old curmudgeon, aren't I? But I'm glad they're doing it. I bow down to them for doing it.
Awesome. And the song itself is a celebration of a Russian sniper who killed Nazis. And then does that reflect at all in our current political environment? Is there...
Well, see, that's the thing, because I think it's American Radical, I do present Woody as having quite a violent streak to him. His songs, particularly during the war, are littered. He dances on the graves of dead Nazis, mm-hmm. and he celebrates... he first was in favor of the atom bomb, the dropping of the atom bomb. Later he changed his mind about that. But he was saying, you can't defeat Nazis and fascists with ice cream cones, as he said, and what did he have on his guitar? Well, Pete Seeger had on his banjo, "This machine surrounds hate and forces it to surrender." Woody says, "This machine kills fascists," and I think that is that it in a nutshell, even though he didn't make up that phrase. I don't know if you know, that phrase was borrowed from during the war, the home front factories,
Uh-huh.
have that sign on their lathes or on their bandsaws or whatever, their drill press. This machine kills fascists. In other words, we're all doing our bit
Right.
for the war effort. And so it was pretty, quite savvy of Woody to take that and put it on his guitar. A lot of people think that he invented the phrase, but he didn't. But I think there is that violent side to Woody, and I remember Nora. Now Nora Guthrie's been great when I've been writing about her father, because she's quite clear that she doesn't own his reputation. She's the steward of much of his of his writings, but she can't stop someone from putting a spin on her father. So when I brought out this violence, this sort of highly, I think, a theatrical violence that I think Woody used in his writing, she said, well, see, that's not the dad that I recognize.
Mm-hmm.
And that's as far as she went in criticizing me for. No, she wasn't criticizing me at all for being because she's out there, trying to promote Woody as my peace is all that I can give you. The songs that Woody is peacemaker. Woody is as somebody who hates war, who says, no, I want to see everybody put their guns down and sit down by the side of the road and say, I ain't gonna, nope, I ain't shooting nobody. I ain't gonna kill nobody. Woody wrote that at the time when the American left was against intervention in the Second World War. Right? There was the Hitler-Stalin pact going on. Entering the war against Hitler would have meant entering the war against the Soviet Union, the mother of the revolution. And then after Hitler,
on account of the new situation.
On account of the new situation. And there we go, flip-flop, as Woody called it. He says, Churchill's flip-flopped. We got the flip-flop too. All of a sudden the Russians are our friends and the Nazis are our enemies. So let's get them Nazis, It was like an exhilarating release, because the American left was very uncomfortable. They were incredibly uncomfortable during that Hitler-Stalin pact period, from 1939 to June of 41. They were very uncomfortable. Because
it's a bad place to be in. Yes,
bad place to be, exactly. Yeah. So Woody became incredibly rhetorically violent. He wasn't, and then afterwards, really after the dropping of the atomic bomb and the Cold War sets in, and the United States is getting very belligerent towards Soviet Union again, and vice versa, then Woody is beginning to become the peace, the peace advocate again,
which speaks to his constant reinvention in that.
Yes, indeed. There's always a new situation, and I think he was so sensitive to be able to adapt to it completely without having to make any bones about it. It's a new situation now.
That's what I do. Yeah, that's
what I do. Yeah,
that's my job. All right, let me play you another piece here.
Okay.
This is Watermelon Slim, and he's playing Vigilante Man.
Okay.
It's gonna be a bumpy ride. Well, you ready to take it off, Bear? Have you seen that vigilante man? Have you seen the vigilante man? Have you seen the vigilante man? trouble drags me down. Sometimes I don't know how I'm gonna make it around. Trouble overwhelms me like a wild stampeding herd of cattle. His brother and sister down. Have you seen the Diginaga man? Have you seen the Diginaga man?
Wow. Watermelon Slim, man.
Okay. Where's he from?
He's, I think he's originally from Massachusetts, but he lives in Mississippi. He's getting to be an old man now. He's a very interesting cat. If you find out a little about him, he comes from a background of privilege, and he abandoned it all to become an itinerant bluesman in Mississippi.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Mississippi blues man, because it seems to me that with that song, with Vigilante Man, most people who are picking it up now are probably picking it up from Ry Cooder rather than from Woody himself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because Ry was, because even before Ry Cooder recorded it, that was on Into the Purple Valley. That was sometime in the 70s.
Yep.
I know that Richie Havens, for instance, does it on the in 1967 at the or 68 at the Woody Guthrie Memorial Concert, and he's just that really fast strumming, you know, in a minor key, and Woody does it in a major key, and just kind of, you know, bounces along with it. But I think the most influential version now probably would be from Ry Cooder, right?
Mm-hmm.
And with the slide guitar, which he uses. And what I've always thought about that is that it was a really interesting version because he takes this Dust Bowl ballad and, in a sense, brings it further east and further south and locates it like in the sundown towns of the Mississippi Delta. But he turns it into a black song.
Yeah.
That's what he does with the slide and even the vocal. You know, if you see, you can see him do it on YouTube. There's the earliest version he's doing, you know, I think the Old Gray Whistle Test.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be a good one to compare with the Watermelon Slim one, you know. So I think, and then when Springsteen did it, he did it with the slide. His band did it with the slide guitar. So everybody is doing it with the slide guitar now, and I think that's has more to do with Ry Cooder than it does with Woody Guthrie.
Mm-hmm.
But another interesting thing that I picked up from what you just played was the revision of the words, the little playing around of some different words that he puts in there in one of the verses. And it's an adaptable song in that respect. I remember in a interview, Ry Cooder was asked why that song is so popular. Wherever he plays, they always asked him for that, and he said, "Well, when I recorded it, you know, the Vietnam War was on, and there was incredible racial violence, and you know, people were getting their heads busted." And he says, "Look, there's always going to be a vigilante man wherever you are, wherever you may be." So I think that carried it through. That's one of those songs which can be adapted. He took it and brought it into the Delta. He took it out of the Dust Bowl and brought it somewhere else, right? Um, and even now, I know that in some of his later performances, like right after Trayvon Martin was shot,
Hmm.
he would begin to weave Trayvon's name into his versions of the song during live performances. So yet again, and Trayvon was killed by a vigilante. It
Right.
wasn't police violence that time. It was a lone vigilante who took it upon himself to dispatch this 17-year-old kid into the next world, unarmed 17-year-old kid. What is that but the vigilante man?
Right.
So it's yet again like an adaptable song that can be taken right out of the Dust Bowl and put to wherever you are. You know.
Which speaks again to all of the character in Woody's material, that as you noted, he could adapt to any circumstance. And his songs seem to have that. There's a kind of a protean quality to them, where they can be made to fit a lot of different situations.
I think so. Yeah, extremely protean, and that has as much to do with Woody's ability to empathize, and
Mm,
that's the other thing. I mean, he may have been a difficult, individual to be with in the room. Like Pete Seeger would say, "I can't stand him when he's around, and I miss him when he's gone." You know, but I don't think anybody could deny his ability to empathize, at least to empathize to the extent that he could get down on paper. Um, you know, Human struggle. You
mhm.
know, and and a struggle is a struggle is a struggle almost. So we take struggle songs and we take them out of this realm, out of this location, out of this time period, and we drop them into this one, and hey, it works, doesn't it? And I think Vigilante Man is a perfect example of that.
The struggles do go on, don't they?
They do.
Well, we're coming down to the end of our time here. I've got over an hour and a half of recording, so to edit it down to 10 minutes worth of good talk is.
Is that it?
Yeah. Oh, it's a 40-minute podcast, man, and so I got a lot of stuff to get in, but that's cool. I mean, I'm having such a fantastic time.
Good.
Is there anything about Woody Guthrie that people don't know that you wish they did? Or
Mm.
conversely, is there stuff about Woody Guthrie that everybody knows for certain that just ain't so, as Will Rogers said?
All right. Yeah. Well. Okay. I think they need to. These things are related. I mean, they need to know the extent that what they know about Woody Guthrie is myth and part of a conscious myth making process, not only by Guthrie himself, but also by Lomax and people like that. But also, I think what I most wanted people to know, I ended up pouring into Modern World Blues because that's the Woody Guthrie that I think a lot of people don't know about. The modern, the figure, the child of modernity. I think a lot of people don't realize that, and that's what I think was probably even a better. My contribution to Woody's scholarship probably was that one even more than American Radical. I
Mhm.
think. Because there was just so much fascinating. They'll find Woody even more fascinating, I think, if they get to grips with that aspect of him. And then they could find out to what extent they could then appreciate to what extent the image that we've received of him, this almost pre-modern, hobo figure, was so far from, obscured so much of what we know about Woody Guthrie and his expansiveness. I want people to know about his expansiveness,
Mm.
really. They need to break him out of the Dust Bowl. They need to break him out of protest music and appreciate him as this almost Renaissance figure, which I think he was, in many ways. That's what I'd like to let people know.
Spoken from the heart.
True.
Will Kaufman is the author of several books on Woody Guthrie. He's an emeritus professor of American culture at the University of Lancashire in England. Will, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. It's been wonderful.
I've enjoyed it very much. Thanks for inviting me.